Let's start right here. क्या भारत का रूस से तेल खरीदना दुनिया की राजनीति बदल रहा है? Is India's decision to buy Russian oil literally rewriting global politics? Welcome to The Explainer. We are standing right in the middle of a massive geopolitical earthquake right now. The rules of global energy, they're shifting beneath our feet, and India is right in the eye of the storm. Let's dive into the data and see what's actually going on.
So, right off the bat, we got to ask the big question, right? Why is India continuing to buy Russian oil even with all this massive global pressure? It's a huge friction point. On one hand, you've got intense, mounting pressure from Western nations basically demanding a total boycott. But on the other hand, you have India making these highly strategic, completely independent energy decisions. To really understand why India is making such bold moves, we have to zoom out and look at the whole global picture.
Which brings us to part one, the Russia-Ukraine war impact.
Okay, so right after the war broke out, the global reaction split, like immediately. Side A, the US and a bunch of European countries took drastic steps to cut their imports of Russian oil. Boom. Just like that, Russia is sitting on this massive surplus of oil. So what do? That's side B. They pivot and start offering their crude oil to the global market at these absolutely staggering discounts. I mean, they needed buyers, and they needed them fast, so they slashed prices to make it happen.
And that is exactly where India makes its strategic move. Look, India is one of the largest oil importers on the planet. They rely heavily on international markets just to keep the lights on and the country running. So when global prices started going crazy and Russia suddenly offered this massive discount, well, India capitalized on it. They stepped right in and bought up huge quantities of this discounted Russian crude. Honestly, from an economic standpoint, the math was just impossible to ignore. Let's move to part two, the common man and inflation. Now, the Indian government is walking the ultimate tightrope here. Yes, there's immense, intense diplomatic pressure from the international community to just stop these purchases, but weigh that against their domestic responsibility. We're talking about providing affordable fuel to over 1 billion people. For the leadership, the perspective is pretty straightforward. If oil becomes completely unaffordable, the devastating impact on everyday citizens is going to be immediate and, frankly, severe. Just think about the terrifying domino effect of expensive oil for a second. Step 1, international crude prices go up. Step 2, bam, petrol and diesel prices jump at your local stations. Step 3, because fuel costs more, transportation and freight costs absolutely surge. It just costs way more to run the trucks. And then finally, step 4, everyday necessities, things like cooking gas cylinders and your daily groceries, they just become totally unaffordable. It's this rapid, crushing chain reaction of inflation. So, by scooping up that discounted Russian oil, India basically built a financial shock absorber. This cheaper oil brings massive economic relief at the national level. It lowers operating costs for businesses, but most importantly, it really eases that crushing burden of inflation on the general public. It literally stops that terrifying economic domino effect right in its tracks. All right, part 3, Middle East tensions and the Strait of Hormuz. So if you look at the map, the Strait of Hormuz is this incredibly critical maritime choke point. You could argue it's the single most vital route for the international oil supply chain. A huge percentage of the entire world's oil flows right through this one tiny, narrow waterway. And lately, with all the rising tensions and instability in the Middle East, specifically right around this strait, it's causing some major anxiety for any country that relies on imported oil. Which brings up a pretty terrifying scenario. What actually happens to global oil prices if this vital maritime route faces a major crisis, or worse, shuts down completely? Well, the answer is pretty simple. Prices would absolutely skyrocket worldwide, like almost overnight. It's a looming threat that really exposes the extreme fragility of our global oil dependency. If you rely entirely on one specific region, you're just incredibly vulnerable to their local conflicts. Let's look at part 4, India's energy security policy. Because they know the massive risks brewing in both Europe and the Middle East, India's ultimate solution right now is aggressive diversification. They're actively trying to avoid depending on any single nation. So yeah, they're purchasing from Russia for sure, but they're also keeping up their purchases from the Middle East, while securing energy from completely different global partners too. They're casting this massive safety net. That way, if one supply chain totally breaks down, the whole country doesn't just grind to a halt. It's basically an incredibly delicate diplomatic dance. India's out there balancing these super complex relations with Russia, America, and Europe, all at the exact same time. They're trying to guarantee their own economic survival without completely alienating any of these major global powers. It's a very pragmatic, multi-pronged approach to what is honestly a super chaotic world map right now. And I think the experts really hit the nail on the head here. ऊर्जा की इस जंग में भारत अपने हितों को सबसे ऊपर रख रहा है. In this energy war, India is putting its national interests first. The data clearly shows a country fiercely prioritizing its own economy and its own citizens above international pressure in a totally changing world order. But as these global alliances keep shifting, we've got to wonder, is this multi-aligned strategy the new blueprint for emerging powers? Or is it just a high-wire act that can't last forever? Something to think about. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.